Sarah Martinez had always been different from her classmates at the Naval Academy. While other midshipmen jumped to attention at the first sound of an alarm, she had developed an unusual habit that would eventually change her life forever. During every single emergency drill, whether it was fire evacuation, men overboard, or general quarters, Sarah would somehow find herself sound asleep. It wasn't intentional defiance or lack of respect for military protocol. Sarah suffered from a rare condition called Klein-Levin syndrome, though she wouldn't learn this until years later. The condition caused her to fall into deep, uncontrollable sleep episodes during times of high stress or loud noises. What her instructors and fellow students saw as laziness or disrespect was actually a neurological response she couldn't control. The first incident happened during her sophomore year at Annapolis. The fire alarm pierced through the early morning silence of Bancroft Hall, sending hundreds of midshipmen scrambling from their bunks. Sarah's roommate, Jessica Chun, shook her vigorously, but Sarah remained completely unconscious. Jessica had to literally drag her semi-conscious roommate down 4 flights of stairs while Sarah mumbled incoherently about being late for calculus class. Word spread quickly through the tight-knit academy community. Sarah became known as Sleepy Martinez among her peers. Some found it amusing, others thought it was an act to get attention, but her instructors were increasingly concerned. Commander Robert Hayes, her company officer, called her into his office multiple times to discuss what he perceived as a serious attitude problem. Midshipman Martinez, Commander Hayes said during one particularly stern meeting, military readiness means being alert and responsive at all times. Your behavior during drills is unacceptable and potentially dangerous. In a real emergency, lives could depend on your ability to respond quickly. Sarah tried to explain that she couldn't control it, that something was wrong with her sleep patterns, but her explanations fell on deaf ears. The military mindset of the academy didn't leave much room for what appeared to be excuses. She was given demerits, extra duties, and stern warnings about her future in the Navy. Despite the mounting pressure and criticism, Sarah excelled in her academic studies. She had a brilliant mind for strategy and tactics, consistently ranking in the top 10% of her class. Her professors noted her exceptional analytical skills and her ability to think outside conventional military doctrine. She had a particular talent for identifying weaknesses in enemy positions and developing innovative solutions to complex problems. Her physical fitness scores were also exemplary. When awake and alert, Sarah could outrun most of her male classmates and had earned expert marksman ratings with multiple weapons systems. She had the physical and mental capabilities to be an outstanding naval officer, but her sleeping episodes continued to be a significant obstacle. The incidents became more frequent and more embarrassing. During a simulated ship attack drill, Sarah fell asleep in the weapons control room. While her teammates scrambled to respond to the simulated threat, Sarah was found curled up under a console, completely oblivious to the chaos around her. The drill instructor's face turned purple with rage when he discovered her there. "This is the last straw, Martinez," he shouted. "You're putting your entire team at risk with this behavior. I'm recommending you for dismissal from the academy." Sarah's academic advisor, Professor Elizabeth Warren, was one of the few people who believed something medical might be causing her episodes. Professor Warren had a background in psychology before joining the Naval Academy faculty and recognized that Sarah's behavior didn't fit the pattern of typical discipline problems. "Have you ever had a sleep study done?" Professor Warren asked during a private consultation. "Your episodes seem to follow specific triggers, and the depth of your sleep during these incidents is unusual." Sarah admitted she had never sought medical evaluation for her sleep issues. Growing up in a working-class family in East Los Angeles, medical care had been a luxury they couldn't afford unless someone was seriously injured or ill. Her parents, both hard-working immigrants from Mexico, had taught her to push through difficulties and not complain about things that seemed minor compared to their daily struggles. Professor Warren helped Sarah schedule an appointment with the Academy's medical staff, but the initial evaluation was superficial. The doctor, pressed for time and dealing with hundreds of midshipmen, simply prescribed better sleep hygiene and recommended she avoid caffeine. The underlying neurological condition went undiagnosed. Meanwhile, Sarah's reputation at the academy continued to suffer. She was passed over for leadership positions that would normally go to someone with her academic achievements. Her peers began to distance themselves from her, worried that association with the problem midshipmen might hurt their own careers. The isolation was painful, but Sarah was determined not to quit. Her family's sacrifices weighed heavily on her mind. Her parents had worked multiple jobs to support her dream of becoming a naval officer. Her father, Miguel, worked construction during the day and cleaned office buildings at night. Her mother, Carmen, worked as a hotel housekeeper and took in sewing projects to earn extra money. They had never complained about the financial burden of supporting her education, but Sarah knew how much they had given up for her opportunity. During her junior year, the sleeping episodes began affecting her performance in other areas. She would fall asleep during important lectures, sometimes even during exams. Her grades started to slip, and she received formal warnings about her academic standing. The stress of potentially losing everything she had worked for only made the condition worse, creating a vicious cycle. One particularly difficult incident occurred during a major inspection by senior naval officials. Sarah's company had spent weeks preparing for the visit, polishing every surface and practicing their drill routines until they were perfect. On the morning of the inspection, during a final practice run, the fire alarm sounded for a simulated emergency evacuation. Sarah was in the middle of explaining communication procedures to a group of visiting high school students considering the academy when the alarm went off. Within seconds, she collapsed into her chair, completely unconscious. The visiting students stood around her in confusion while her classmates tried unsuccessfully to wake her. The senior officials witnessed the entire embarrassing scene. The incident made its way up the chain of command to the academy superintendent. Sarah was called before a disciplinary board and faced with the possibility of immediate dismissal. The board consisted of senior officers who had dedicated their lives to military service and had little patience for what they saw as a fundamental inability to meet basic military standards. Captain Michael Torres, the board chairman, reviewed Sarah's file with obvious disappointment. Midshipman Martinez, your academic record shows exceptional potential, but your repeated failures during emergency procedures represent a serious liability. The Navy cannot afford officers who cannot be counted on during critical moments. Sarah made one final attempt to explain her condition, describing the medical consultations and the possibility that something beyond her control was causing the episodes. She spoke passionately about her commitment to serving her country and her willingness to undergo any treatment necessary to address the problem. The board deliberated for hours. Some members argued for immediate dismissal, while others, influenced by her academic achievements and obvious dedication, pushed for one final chance. Eventually, they reached a compromise that would determine Sarah's fate and unknowingly set her on a path toward an extraordinary future. Midshipman Martinez, Captain Torres announced when the board reconvened, you will be given one final opportunity to prove yourself worthy of commissioning as a naval officer. You will be assigned to a special evaluation program that will test your abilities under extreme conditions. This is your last chance. Failure will result in immediate dismissal with no possibility of appeal. Sarah accepted the terms without hesitation, though she had no idea what the special evaluation program entailed. She was simply grateful for another opportunity to prove herself and honor her family's sacrifices. What she didn't know was that this decision would eventually lead her to cross paths with some of the most elite warriors in the American military and discover abilities she never knew she possessed. The evaluation program was shrouded in secrecy, with details provided only on a need-to-know basis. Sarah was told to report to a classified location in Virginia 2 weeks after the end of the academic term. She was instructed to bring minimal personal items and prepare for an extended period of evaluation that could last several months. As she packed her few belongings and prepared to leave Annapolis, Sarah felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. She had no idea that the sleeping episodes that had nearly destroyed her naval career would soon become the key to unlocking opportunities beyond her wildest imagination. The path ahead would test her in ways she could never have anticipated and ultimately lead to her involvement with operations that would remain classified for decades to come. The stage was set for a transformation that would take a struggling midshipman known for falling asleep during drills and turn her into one of the most valuable assets in American special operations. But first, Sarah would have to survive what was essentially a final exam that would push her physical, mental, and emotional limits to their breaking point. The classified facility in Virginia looked nothing like what Sarah had expected. Hidden deep in the Blue Ridge Mountains, the compound was accessible only through a series of unmarked roads that wound through dense forest. High-tech security checkpoints appeared every few miles, manned by stern-faced guards who scrutinized her credentials with military precision. When Sarah finally arrived at the main facility, she was surprised to find herself among a diverse group of individuals from different military branches. There were Army Rangers, Air Force pararescue specialists, Marine Force recon operators, and even a few civilian contractors whose backgrounds remained mysterious. What they all had in common was some form of unusual ability or characteristic that had brought them to the attention of a highly classified Pentagon program. The program was officially called the Human Performance Research Initiative, though the participants would later learn its unofficial nickname was Project Sandman. The military had begun investigating whether certain neurological differences that were typically seen as disadvantages might actually provide tactical advantages under specific circumstances. Sarah's sleeping episodes had caught the attention of researchers studying stress responses and consciousness manipulation. Dr. Rebecca Thornton, a neuroscientist with security clearances that went beyond top secret, explained the program's purpose during the initial briefing. Each of you possesses a characteristic that conventional military doctrine would consider a liability. Our research suggests these same characteristics might provide unique advantages in specialized operations. You're here to help us explore those possibilities. The first few weeks were dedicated to extensive medical and psychological evaluations. Sarah underwent sleep studies, brain imaging, and genetic testing that far exceeded anything she had experienced at the Naval Academy. The researchers discovered that her Klein-Levin syndrome was actually a rare variant that included enhanced cognitive processing during certain sleep states. Her brain showed unusual activity patterns that suggested she might be able to process and retain information even while appearing completely unconscious. Dr. Thornton was particularly fascinated by Sarah's test results. Your brain doesn't shut down during these episodes the way we would expect, she explained while reviewing the neuroimaging data. Instead, it appears to enter a highly focused processing state. Your auditory centers remain active, and your memory consolidation actually increases during these periods. The revelation that her sleeping episodes might have hidden benefits was both exciting and confusing for Sarah. She had spent years viewing her condition as a weakness that threatened her military career. The possibility that it might actually be an asset was difficult to accept after so much criticism and disappointment. Training at the facility was unlike anything she had experienced at the Naval Academy. Instead of traditional military drills focused on immediate response and action, the program emphasized patience, observation, and unconventional problem-solving. Sarah found herself excelling in scenarios that required prolonged periods of motionless waiting and information gathering. One particular exercise involved monitoring enemy communications for days at a time while maintaining complete concealment. Other participants struggled with the mental fatigue and physical discomfort of remaining perfectly still for hours, but Sarah discovered she could enter controlled versions of her sleep states while still processing and remembering everything she heard. Her ability to appear completely inactive while remaining mentally alert proved to be incredibly valuable. Lieutenant Commander James Mitchell, a Navy SEAL who served as one of the program's tactical advisors, began taking special interest in Sarah's unique capabilities. Mitchell had been wounded during a classified operation in the Middle East and was temporarily assigned to the research program while recovering from his injuries. Unlike many of the traditional military instructors Sarah had encountered, Mitchell appreciated unconventional approaches to warfare. Traditional military thinking assumes that alertness and immediate response are always optimal, Mitchell explained during one of their training sessions. But some of the most effective intelligence gathering requires the opposite approach. Sometimes the best weapon is the ability to become completely invisible and forgettable. Mitchell began developing specialized training scenarios specifically designed to utilize Sarah's abilities. He created situations where she would need to gather intelligence while appearing to be unconscious or incapacitated. The exercises were initially challenging because they required her to deliberately trigger her sleep episodes while maintaining enough conscious awareness to complete her mission objectives. The breakthrough came during a complex scenario that simulated infiltration of a terrorist safe house. Sarah was assigned to pose as a hostage who had been drugged into unconsciousness while actually monitoring the conversations and activities of her captors. Other participants had failed this exercise because they couldn't maintain the appearance of being completely helpless while still gathering the required intelligence. Sarah's performance was extraordinary. She remained motionless and apparently unconscious for over 12 hours while the exercise continued around her. The role-playing terrorists discussed their plans, revealed security procedures, and even debated what to do with their unconscious prisoner, never suspecting that she was absorbing every word. When the exercise concluded, Sarah provided a complete intelligence briefing that included details other participants had missed entirely. Word of Sarah's exceptional performance reached higher levels within the Pentagon's Special Operations community. The research program was just one part of a larger effort to identify and develop unconventional capabilities for use in the global war on terrorism. Traditional approaches were proving insufficient against enemies who operated outside conventional military doctrine, and military leaders were increasingly interested in creative solutions. General Patricia Hayes, the program's oversight commander, reviewed Sarah's evaluation reports with growing interest. General Hayes had spent her career in military intelligence and understood the value of assets who could operate in ways that enemies wouldn't anticipate. Sarah's ability to gather intelligence while appearing completely harmless and incapacitated represented a significant operational advantage. The decision was made to advance Sarah to the next phase of evaluation, which involved integration with active special operations units. She would be attached to various teams as an observer and potential asset, allowing real-world operators to evaluate her capabilities under actual mission conditions. The first assignment would be with a Navy SEAL team preparing for deployment to Afghanistan. SEAL Team 6 was conducting pre-deployment training at a facility in North Carolina when Sarah arrived for her evaluation period. The team members were initially skeptical about having an academy midshipman with no operational experience attached to their unit, especially one with a reputation for sleeping through important events. Their attitudes began to change as they learned more about her unique abilities and the potential applications. Master Chief Petty Officer David Rodriguez, the team's senior enlisted leader, had been briefed on Sarah's background and the research program's objectives. Rodriguez was a veteran of dozens of combat deployments and had learned to appreciate any advantage that could help his men complete their missions and return home safely. He was willing to explore unconventional approaches if they proved effective. "We operate in environments where traditional surveillance methods don't work," Rodriguez explained to his team. "If Martinez can gather intelligence in situations where our normal approaches would be detected or compromised, she could be invaluable to our operations." The SEAL team's training scenarios were far more intense than anything Sarah had experienced during the research program. She was required to keep up with some of the most physically fit and mentally tough warriors in the American military while learning to apply her abilities in realistic combat situations. The learning curve was steep, but her determination to prove herself drove her to exceed every expectation. One training exercise involved infiltrating a mock village to gather intelligence on terrorist activities. Traditional approaches would require careful surveillance from concealed positions, risking detection by sentries and security patrols. Sarah proposed an alternative approach where she would enter the village posing as an injured civilian who had collapsed from exhaustion or injury. The exercise was designed to test her ability to maintain her cover while gathering actionable intelligence. Sarah positioned herself in the village center and entered one of her controlled sleep states, appearing to be an unconscious refugee who had collapsed from exhaustion. Over the course of several hours, the role-playing villagers and terrorists moved around her, conducting their activities while completely ignoring her presence. The intelligence she gathered during the exercise was remarkable. She learned the locations of weapon caches, identified key terrorist leaders, discovered planned attack routes, and even overheard discussions about operational security measures. All of this was accomplished without raising any suspicion or alerting the opposition forces to the presence of American intelligence assets. Master Chief Rodriguez was impressed by the results, but remained concerned about the risks involved in Sarah's approach. The intelligence value is undeniable, he told the evaluation team, but putting an unarmed asset in such an exposed position violates every principle of force protection we follow. Dr. Thornton argued that the apparent vulnerability was actually part of the operational advantage. Traditional intelligence assets are detected because they appear threatening or out of place. Sarah's condition allows her to become genuinely invisible by appearing completely harmless and non-threatening. The enemy dismisses her as irrelevant, which makes her perfect for gathering information they would never reveal in front of anyone they considered a potential threat. The debate about how to utilize Sarah's abilities safely continued throughout her evaluation period with the SEAL team. Some members argued that the risks were too great, while others recognized the unprecedented intelligence-gathering opportunities her condition provided. The discussions would ultimately influence how special operations forces approached unconventional warfare in the years to come. As Sarah's evaluation period neared its end, she had proven that her sleeping episodes could be transformed from a career-ending liability into a valuable operational asset. Her success with the SEAL team had opened doors to opportunities she could never have imagined when she was facing dismissal from the Naval Academy. But the real test of her abilities was still ahead, as events in Afghanistan were about to create a situation where her unique talents would be needed more than anyone could have predicted. The stage was set for Sarah to transition from experimental subject to active operational asset, though neither she nor her evaluators could foresee the extraordinary circumstances that would soon put her unconventional abilities to the ultimate test in one of the most dangerous regions on Earth. The deployment to Afghanistan came sooner than expected. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value terrorist target had been tracked to a remote village in the Hindu Kush Mountains, and multiple agencies were coordinating to capture or eliminate him before he could disappear again. Sarah found herself on a transport plane heading to Bagram Air Base just 3 weeks after completing her evaluation with the SEAL team. The terrorist they were pursuing was Ahmad Hassan al-Zawahiri, a bomb maker responsible for attacks across the region that had killed dozens of American soldiers and hundreds of civilians. Al-Zawahiri had proven exceptionally difficult to track because he moved frequently and maintained strict operational security. Traditional surveillance methods had failed repeatedly, and time was running out before he would likely relocate again. Sarah was assigned to a joint task force that included operators from multiple special operations units. The mission commander was Colonel Sarah Jensen, an Army Special Forces officer with extensive experience in unconventional warfare. Colonel Jensen had specifically requested Sarah's inclusion in the operation after reviewing her evaluation reports and recognizing the potential value of her unique capabilities. Al-Zawahiri has evaded capture because he's paranoid about surveillance, Colonel Jensen explained during the mission briefing. He changes locations frequently, uses multiple layers of security, and has sources throughout the region who watch for American intelligence activities. We need an approach he won't see coming. The plan was audacious and dangerous. Sarah would be inserted into the target village posing as a refugee who had been injured during fighting in a neighboring province. Her apparent unconsciousness would allow her to be placed in locations where traditional surveillance would be impossible, and her ability to process information while appearing incapacitated would enable intelligence gathering that could reveal al-Zawahiri's location and plans. The insertion itself required careful coordination with local assets who had been cultivated by CIA operatives over several months. Sarah would be transported to the village by a trusted local contact who believed he was helping an injured civilian reach medical care. The cover story was that she had been caught in an explosion that left her in a catatonic state, requiring her to be moved to a facility where she could receive proper treatment. Master Chief Rodriguez, who had volunteered to extend his deployment to support the operation, provided additional training on maintaining cover under extreme stress. "You'll be completely on your own once you're in position," he warned Sarah. "We can't communicate with you, we can't extract you immediately if something goes wrong, and you'll have to rely entirely on your own judgment about when to abort the mission." The techniques were still experimental, and there were unknown risks involved in their use under combat conditions. The village where Al-Zawari was believed to be hiding was a collection of mud brick buildings clustered around a central courtyard in a valley surrounded by towering mountains. The location provided excellent defensive positions and multiple escape routes, which explained why the terrorist leader had chosen it as a temporary base. American forces could surround the village, but a direct assault would likely result in Al-Zawari's escape through mountain passages that local fighters knew intimately. Sarah was inserted into the village during the early morning hours, transported by a local man who genuinely believed he was helping an injured woman reach medical care. She had been made up to appear as though she had suffered severe trauma, with realistic injuries created by the task force's medical team. Her breathing was shallow, her responses to stimuli were minimal, and she appeared to be barely clinging to life. The village elder, a man named Kareem who served as the unofficial leader of the community, took responsibility for Sarah's care. Kareem was actually one of Al-Zawari's security network members, though American intelligence wasn't certain of his exact role in the terrorist organization. Having Sarah placed under his direct supervision was both an opportunity and a significant risk. Al-Zawari himself was more paranoid than intelligence reports had indicated. He rarely stayed in the same building for more than a few hours, maintained multiple bodyguards at all times, and insisted on screening anyone who entered areas where he might be present. Sarah's apparent condition as an unconscious refugee actually worked in her favor, as Al-Zawari's security protocols focused on identifying active threats rather than monitoring incapacitated civilians. The first few days in the village were challenging for Sarah as she adjusted to maintaining her cover while gathering useful intelligence. She was placed in a small room adjacent to the main courtyard, where she could overhear conversations and observe activities while appearing completely unconscious. The terrorist leader's security team occasionally checked on her, but they quickly dismissed her as irrelevant to their operations. Sarah's breakthrough came on the fourth day when Al-Zawari himself visited the building where she was being housed. The terrorist leader was discussing plans for a major operation with his lieutenants, and they chose the room next to Sarah's as a meeting location because they believed it provided privacy and security. They never suspected that the unconscious woman in the adjacent room was capable of understanding and remembering every word of their conversation. The intelligence Sarah gathered was extraordinary. Al-Zawari was planning a coordinated attack on multiple American bases that would involve vehicle-borne explosives, insider threats, and diversionary operations designed to maximize casualties. The attack was scheduled for the following week, and the details she overheard provided enough information to prevent what could have been one of the deadliest terrorist operations of the war. Even more importantly, Sarah learned that Al-Zawari was planning to leave the village within the next 48 hours to oversee final preparations for the attacks. His departure would take him to a location that American forces hadn't identified, potentially allowing him to escape capture and carry out his planned operations. The intelligence she gathered represented the last opportunity to locate and neutralize him before he could implement his devastating plans. The challenge was communicating this crucial information to the task force without compromising her cover. Sarah had to wait for an opportunity when she wouldn't be observed, then use a concealed communication device to transmit a brief coded message. The risk was enormous because discovery would not only result in her death, but would also alert Al-Zawari that his security had been compromised. Sarah's opportunity came during the evening prayer time when most of the village residents, including her watchers, were gathered at the local mosque. She had approximately 20 minutes to transmit her intelligence before the prayers concluded and people returned to their normal activities. Using techniques she had learned during training, Sarah activated her communication device and began transmitting the coded message that would alert the task force to the imminent threat. The transmission was successful, but Sarah realized she had been observed by a young boy who had remained in the building instead of attending prayers. The child was staring at her with obvious confusion, having seen her move and manipulate objects while she was supposed to be unconscious. Sarah faced an immediate decision about whether to abort her mission or attempt to maintain her cover despite the potential compromise. In a split-second decision that would later be analyzed by military psychologists as an example of exceptional tactical thinking under extreme pressure, Sarah chose to incorporate the child into her cover story. She began showing signs of regaining consciousness, appearing confused and disoriented as though she was emerging from a traumatic catatonic state. The child's presence actually supported this narrative, as his innocent questions about her condition seemed natural under the circumstances. The ruse worked perfectly. When the adults returned from prayers, they found Sarah apparently beginning to recover from her injuries, with the young witness describing how she had started moving and making soft sounds. The terrorist security team was pleased that their refugee was recovering rather than suspicions that she might be something other than what she appeared to be. Sarah's apparent improvement in condition also provided her with additional opportunities to gather intelligence. As she began appearing more alert and responsive, the terrorists relaxed their security measures around her, assuming that an injured civilian posed no threat to their operations. This allowed her to observe preparations for al-Zawahiri's departure and gather additional details about his planned attacks. The final phase of Sarah's mission required her to identify the exact timing and method of al-Zawahiri's departure so that American forces could intercept him. The terrorist leader's paranoid security measures made this extremely difficult, as his plans were shared only with a select few trusted associates. Sarah had to position herself where she could overhear final planning discussions without raising suspicion about her sudden interest in activities around her. Using her gradually improving condition as cover, Sarah began moving around the building more freely, always appearing weak and disoriented but slowly recovering from her traumatic injuries. This allowed her to position herself near locations where planning meetings were likely to occur, while maintaining the appearance of someone who was still too impaired to understand or remember what she might overhear. The crucial intelligence came during al-Zawahiri's final night in the village. Sarah overheard a conversation between the terrorist leader and his chief lieutenant that revealed the exact route, timing, and security arrangements for his departure. The information included details about diversionary movements designed to confuse American surveillance, the actual vehicle he would be using, and the location where he would meet his contacts for the next phase of his operation. Sarah transmitted this final intelligence package just hours before al-Zawahiri's planned departure, providing the task force with everything they needed to intercept him successfully. The operation that followed would become one of the most significant counterterrorism successes of the Afghanistan campaign. But Sarah's role in making it possible would remain classified for years to come. As al-Zawahiri prepared to leave the village for what he believed would be a carefully planned escape, he had no idea that his every move had been observed and reported by the seemingly unconscious refugee who had been ignored by his security team throughout his stay. The stage was set for a confrontation that would validate the experimental program that had transformed Sarah's career-threatening disability into one of America's most valuable intelligence assets. The pre-dawn hours of September 15th marked the beginning of what would later be called Operation Silent Observer. Based on Sarah's intelligence, the Joint Task Force had positioned assets along al-Zawahiri's planned escape route, with backup teams ready to respond to the diversionary movements she had identified. The precision of her intelligence gathering meant that American forces knew not just where the terrorist would be, but when and how he would attempt to evade capture. Colonel Jensen coordinated the operation from a command post hidden in the mountains overlooking the valley. Multiple teams were positioned at strategic points along the route, with SEAL Team 6 taking the primary intercept position at a narrow mountain pass, where al-Zawahiri's vehicle would be forced to slow down. Master Chief Rodriguez led the direct action team, with specific orders to capture al-Zawahiri alive if possible to exploit his knowledge of terrorist networks across the region. Sarah remained in the village, maintaining her cover as a recovering refugee while the operation unfolded around her. Her handlers had decided that extracting her before al-Zawahiri's departure would risk compromising the mission, so she would have to wait until the intercept operation was complete before being safely recovered. The decision placed her in significant danger, as any surviving terrorists would likely take revenge on anyone they suspected of collaboration with American forces. Al-Zawahiri departed the village exactly as Sarah had predicted, using a 3-vehicle convoy with the terrorist leader hidden in the middle vehicle, while decoys traveled different routes to confuse potential surveillance. The diversionary movements were exactly as Sarah had overheard, allowing American forces to ignore the false targets and concentrate on the actual escape attempt. The level of detail in her intelligence was so precise that some operators wondered if the mission had been compromised, and Al-Zawahiri was walking into a trap. The intercept occurred at 0347 hours as Al-Zawahiri's convoy approached the narrow mountain pass. SEAL Team 6 had positioned explosives to block the road ahead and, behind the convoy, trapping the vehicles in a kill zone where the terrorists would have limited options for escape or resistance. The operation was designed to minimize casualties while ensuring that Al-Zawahiri could not escape to continue his terrorist activities. The terrorist leader's security team responded exactly as American intelligence had predicted based on their previous encounters with similar situations. They immediately assumed that their position had been revealed through electronic surveillance or local informants, and began implementing security procedures that Sarah had overheard them discussing. Their predictable response patterns allowed the SEAL team to anticipate and counter their defensive measures. Al-Zawahiri himself proved to be more dangerous than expected when he produced a suicide vest and threatened to detonate it rather than allow himself to be captured. The situation required delicate negotiation skills that few military operators possessed, as the terrorist's death would eliminate valuable intelligence about planned attacks and terrorist network connections. Master Chief Rodriguez found himself in a psychological battle with one of the region's most wanted criminals. "You have nowhere to go," Rodriguez called out in Arabic, using language skills he had developed during multiple deployments. "Your escape routes are blocked, your security team is neutralized, and your planned attacks have been compromised. Surrender now, and you may survive to see your family again." Al-Zawahiri's response revealed information that validated Sarah's intelligence gathering in ways the task force hadn't expected. The terrorist leader's angry tirade included references to security breaches and compromised operations that matched exactly what Sarah had overheard during her time in the village. His words confirmed that American forces had gained access to information that should have been impossible to obtain through conventional intelligence methods. The standoff continued for over an hour as military negotiators attempted to convince Al-Zawahiri to surrender. During this time, Sarah was experiencing one of the most dangerous periods of her mission. Villagers had heard the explosions and gunfire from the mountain pass and realized that American forces were conducting operations in their area. Some residents suspected that the injured refugee they had been caring for might be connected to the foreign military presence. Kareem, the village elder who had supervised Sarah's care, began asking probing questions about her background and how she had come to be in their village. Sarah's cover story was holding under scrutiny, but she could sense growing suspicion among some villagers who found it suspicious that major military operations were occurring so soon after her arrival. Her training in maintaining cover under pressure was being tested under conditions that her instructors had never anticipated. The breakthrough in the standoff came when Al-Zawahiri made a tactical error that revealed his psychological vulnerabilities. In his anger and frustration, he began describing operational details that he believed had been compromised, inadvertently providing additional intelligence about terrorist activities across the region. Master Chief Rodriguez recognized the opportunity and began using this information to convince Al-Zawahiri that resistance was futile. "We know about the weapons cache in Jalalabad," Rodriguez called out, referencing information that Sarah had gathered. "We know about your contacts in Pakistan, and we know about the planned attacks on the airfields. Your entire network has been exposed. Surrender now and help us prevent unnecessary deaths, or die here and accomplish nothing." The psychological pressure proved effective. Al-Zawahiri's certainty that his operations were secure began to crumble as Rodriguez demonstrated detailed knowledge of information that should have been known only to the terrorist's closest associates. The realization that his security had been so thoroughly compromised undermined his confidence and weakened his resolve to die rather than surrender. At 0523 hours, Al-Zawahiri removed his suicide vest and emerged from his vehicle with his hands raised. The capture was completed without additional casualties, preserving the terrorist leader for interrogation that would ultimately prevent multiple planned attacks and lead to the disruption of terrorist networks across 3 countries. The success of the operation validated the experimental intelligence-gathering techniques that had made Sarah's mission possible. Sarah's extraction from the village occurred 6 hours later, disguised as the evacuation of a recovered refugee to a medical facility in a neighboring province. Her departure was coordinated with local authorities who believed they were helping to ensure proper medical care for someone who had been injured in the regional fighting. The cover story was so convincing that several villagers expressed concern about her welfare and asked to be informed of her recovery progress. The debriefing sessions that followed revealed the full extent of Sarah's intelligence-gathering achievements. Over the course of 7 days in the village, she had gathered information that traditional surveillance methods had failed to obtain over several months of operations. Her ability to appear completely non-threatening while maintaining acute awareness of her surroundings had provided access to intelligence that would normally require years of network development to acquire. Dr. Thornton documented the neurological aspects of Sarah's performance with excitement that was unusual for the normally reserved scientist. The integration of conscious awareness with apparent unconsciousness exceeded our most optimistic predictions, she reported to Pentagon officials. Subject demonstrated ability to maintain complex cognitive processing while presenting authentic physiological markers of deep unconsciousness. The potential applications for this capability are extraordinary. General Hayes reviewed the mission reports and immediately authorized expansion of the research program. Sarah's success had proven that unconventional approaches to intelligence gathering could provide strategic advantages that traditional methods could not achieve. The program would be expanded to identify and train additional assets with similar capabilities, though Sarah's specific neurological condition remained extremely rare. Al-Zawahiri's interrogation provided intelligence that prevented 17 planned terrorist attacks and led to the capture or elimination of 43 additional terrorist operatives. The information Sarah had gathered about his network connections proved to be remarkably accurate, validating her intelligence-gathering techniques and demonstrating the strategic value of her unique abilities. The ripple effects of her mission would continue for years as counterterrorism operations targeted networks and activities she had identified. Sarah returned to the United States as a legitimate war hero, though her specific contributions would remain classified for national security reasons. She was awarded decorations that recognized her service without revealing the details of her operations, and she was offered opportunities to continue her naval career with guarantees that her sleeping episodes would be viewed as operational assets rather than career limitations. The Naval Academy welcomed her back as a graduate with distinction, and her previous disciplinary issues were formally expunged from her record. Professor Warren, who had first suggested that Sarah's sleeping episodes might have medical causes, was vindicated in her assessment and became one of the first faculty members to learn the classified details of Sarah's transformation from problem midshipman to valuable intelligence asset. Sarah's family finally learned that their daughter had been involved in important military operations, though they were never told the specific details of her service. Miguel and Carmen Martinez attended their daughter's commissioning ceremony as a Navy lieutenant, proud of her achievements, but unaware that she had become one of the most successful intelligence operatives in modern military history. The success of Operation Silent Observer led to significant changes in how American Special Operations Forces approached intelligence gathering in denied areas. Sarah's techniques were studied and adapted for use by other operatives, though none would achieve quite the same level of success due to the unique neurological characteristics that made her abilities possible. The program she had pioneered would eventually train dozens of operatives with unconventional capabilities. Years later, Sarah would reflect on the ironic turn her career had taken. The sleeping episodes that had nearly resulted in her dismissal from the Naval Academy had ultimately enabled her to serve her country in ways that conventional officers could never have imagined. Her apparent weakness had become her greatest strength, and her perceived liability had transformed into an invaluable strategic asset. The classified nature of her service meant that Sarah could never publicly discuss her achievements or receive recognition for her contributions to national security. She found satisfaction in knowing that her work had saved lives and disrupted terrorist operations, even if her role would remain secret. The young woman who had been known as Sleepy Martinez at the Naval Academy had become one of America's most effective weapons in the fight against terrorism. Sarah's story became a case study in military training programs, though the details were so classified that only the highest-level personnel were aware of the full extent of her achievements. Her experience demonstrated the importance of recognizing unconventional capabilities and finding innovative ways to apply them in service of national security objectives. The transformation was complete. Sarah Martinez had evolved from a struggling midshipman facing dismissal for falling asleep during drills to an elite intelligence operative whose unique abilities had proven invaluable in the most dangerous and important missions her country could assign. The command that had altered everything wasn't shouted during a drill or announced in a briefing room, but whispered in a terrorist safe house where her apparent unconsciousness had made her invisible to enemies who never suspected they were revealing their secrets to one of America's most valuable assets.